This episode of the Critical Careers podcast is sponsored by CBRE. Hi, I'm Joyce Wadey. Welcome to the Critical Careers podcast. On today's show, we're welcoming Mcilvaney, Vice President of Global Procurement for Yondr, Lisa Duignan, Global Projects Director with Turner & Townsend, and Caroline Manzor, Business Unit Director for CBRE. On today's show, we're talking about how great leaders build connection and what it takes to create a culture where teams feel trusted, supported, and like they truly belong. Because belonging isn't just a nice to have, it's a performance driver. When people feel connected and valued, teams don't just deliver, they perform at their best. So sit back, relax, have a listen, and enjoy the show. Thank you all for being here today for our live podcast recording of Critical Careers here at our Season 1 sponsor, CBRE's offices. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for joining us and on the panel and stuff today as well. We kind of have an opportunity today to talk about leadership and to kind of highlight what your experiences have been and what has been good and what's worked for you and what did you not like and what did you change and that kind of stuff. And one of those components to run a successful team is that sense of belonging and is that sense of, satisfaction and belonging's not just a nice to have. It is a foundation for teams because team members that feel like they belong, they perform better, the teams are more productive. And what does that look like to you? And how do you lead high-performing teams in such a fast-paced environment like the data center industry? So before we get started, if you'd like to go ahead and do a quick introduction of yourselves, and then so everybody knows who we all are here today.
So I'm Mcilvaney. I've been in the data center industry about 10 years, in procurement itself for nearly 25 years. So thanks for having me.
Hello, I'm Lisa Duignan. I'm a director at Turner & Townsend, and I've been working in the data center industry probably 11 years or so now.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. My name is Caroline Manzor, and I have the pleasure of being the Business Unit Director for the data center business in Ireland. I'm with CBRE coming up to 11 years and in the DC industry probably 18 or 19 years now.
Eve, just to start with you, when you think about leadership and belonging, what does that mean to you? And is there a point in your career that you kind of that a concept really resonated for you?
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, what does belonging mean to me? It means everything. To be honest, it means I can be myself. It means I can be comfortable. I'm in an environment where I can speak up. It's safe. So it really does mean everything. And I think everybody in their careers should feel like they belong. So an inclusive environment, I would say, is super important. It comes from a couple of inputs. It's not just the company you work for, it's how you are in yourself as well. And I would say as I've grown through my career and then found the industry that I'm really comfortable in, that broader level of belonging in itself, and then the team that you're working with and who you're working for can improve that level of belonging as well. So going back 10 years, my first job in data centers, essentially, I really felt like I found that industry that I don't want to leave. And that happened really, really quickly. And that was partly because I was 15 years into my career. So I felt confident, I felt accepted, I felt respected for the career that I'd built. And grown life experience as well helps with that as well. And then the industry itself, I do find it a very uplifting industry. It's full of great people who I worked for. I was kind of match made with the person rather than the industry. So new industry to me, accidentally fell into it, as you were saying. But the person that I worked for back then, and he'll know who he is, I'm still in touch with today. He has retired, but one of the best leaders I've ever worked for, really allowed me to be myself, challenge, ask the questions. I would say the stupid questions because that's what everyone says, but it's not stupid.
No, they're not.
And we shouldn't call them stupid because then people don't feel safe to ask them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But that's essentially when I started to feel like I belonged 10 years ago, and that's into a 25-year career.
Well, and I think it's an interesting point that you make because I do think, for many of us, male or female, when you are starting out your career, and if you're not quite in the right place for you, what doesn't feel good, and so that when you do land in an industry or you land at a company that really does tick so many boxes for you, then you can recognize that and go, all right, I have found my place. And coming into that 15 years in your career, that makes a lot of sense because you've tried other things. You now know what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is difficult being a woman as well, I would say, coming up in your career, because it's harder at times to feel comfortable to speak up and speak out. And I've always actually worked in quite male-dominated environments. So when you get older and more comfortable in yourself and confident, you do start to speak up and you think, why wasn't I doing this earlier? Why wasn't I asking those questions? And it's difficult to pinpoint whether that's in me or whether it's the people I was around. But, that just started to change as I grew.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for all of you, you each come from different companies and have different backgrounds and stuff in the industry. In an industry that is so fast paced and such a high pressure environment like the data center industry can be, what is it that you found about creating a culture where people feel comfortable or they feel that sense of belonging or they feel that inclusion in it?
I think in terms of, being able to kind of adapt to that pace and that scale, I'd probably allude with what Eva's saying, and that it is all about the people that are leading in the first instance, because, you can either lead with panic and urgency, or you can lead with that kind of steady, measured, calm approach. And one of the things that we talked about earlier in the week when we were preparing was the sense of urgency and kind of, I wouldn't say panic, but there probably is always that sense of panic in the data center industry because everything feels so time sensitive and mission critical, as we call it, critical careers. There's a lot of words that bring that kind of sense of urgency, panic, worry to people's minds. But actually, what we are doing is typically constructing buildings, digital infrastructure. It can be done deliberately with kind of care, attention, rigor, without having to have people bend over backwards. You just need that leadership when you're getting into the industry to kind of coach you to be able to recognize that for a lot of us, managing chaos is our day job.
Yeah.
Because there's so much change in this industry that you are guaranteed that something is going to happen in the day that will mess up your plan. Something that you intended to do or something that was planned to happen will change. And that is actually the specialism that a lot of us bring, is the expertise in adapting really quickly to that, whether it's design related, whether it's engineering. Part of what makes you really valuable is actually your attitude and your kind of calm demeanor in dealing with it and not letting it consume you is really important.
No, absolutely. And I do like that idea, that concept of the job is chaos sometimes. That is what you are supposed to be managing through and helping the team still be productive and that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. So Caroline, anything from your perspective?
I really like the idea of chaos. For me, I have different levels of chaos. So there can be organized chaos or there can be complete chaos. And it obviously there are so many factors that are involved in it, but it's to try and be consistent in our approach as leaders. To come across as being calm and effective to the team, because without the team we're nothing. I'm nothing. I wouldn't be here today without the great team that are beside me, pushing me on every day. And it is a pressurized environment, but it's an environment that we all strive in, and we wouldn't be here today if we didn't love it.
And that's 100% true, because every single person that I've talked to so far, you have to enjoy that aspect to be successful in this industry. If this is not if you can't deal well with chaos, then really isn't the industry for you. So that is 100% true. Yeah. Eve, what about you? Anything from your perspective?
I lead from a place whereby I am part of the team. I'm not up here on a pedestal. It's not a hierarchical thing. If there's stuff that needs to be done, we all muck in together. Show the team you're willing to do the work as well. Also, having empathy and humility as you go through. We have a lot of chaos. We have a lot of different situations that crop up in our days. So putting yourself in other people's shoes, understanding perspectives, what's driving things, what's driving that chaos, I think is super important. So being able to just step back a bit, have that empathy, and then show your team how to do that as well.
Yeah, because that becomes a leading by example. When you stay calm, it'll help them stay calm. Or when you're, being empathetic, it'll hopefully, you'll see that reflected back within their interactions too. So, so Caroline, what do you think has shaped your leadership style the most?
I suppose I firstly have to be very honest to say I'm not totally the rounded leader by any means. And some people won't be surprised that I've probably taken a slightly different approach to most people. I have looked throughout my career that I've been very fortunate to have today to maybe identify leaders that I personally may have felt that were ineffective and made me more determined not to be that type of leader.
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously take the positives, and I've been very fortunate to have great leaders and great managers throughout my career, but to develop and try to avoid the pitfalls that I may have been, I won't say necessarily exposed to, but subjected to throughout various times through my career.
Yeah.
So it's to realize that the importance, and again, I'll say back to the team, that we collectively are all on the same page, that we understand the objective. You know, for us, it's the CBRE strategy to keep the lights on, compliance and governance, but more importantly, that they can see my commitment back to them. I can't, as Eve said, the ivory tower, that's no good.
Right.
They've got to see me, you've got to be visible, and they've got to understand me. I'm not sure after 11 years of my team necessarily understand me, but it's on a journey. But it's the sense of inclusion and to be the best that you can be. And I think when they see your commitment, I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if you're asking people to give their time or when the time comes that you have to ask them to give up part of their weekend or their evenings because you're dealing with a critical issue, if they think you're just doing your own thing and just expecting them to do it, I mean, that makes a big difference.
Exactly. And it comes back to, be it Justin mentioned our rise values, but more importantly, trust. I need to know that if I get a call at 2:00 in the morning, that one of my managers will pick the phone up to me. And I've never been in a situation where it hasn't happened. So it has to be mutual respect.
Yeah. So, Lisa, I mean, Caroline brings up a good word there, trust, and that's a word you hear a lot. I think it's one of those words that if there's not authentic action behind it, it kind of falls flat and doesn't have a whole lot of meaning. So how do you see that trust? How do you build that trust within your teams?
I think in a leadership sense, a lot of that is around trying to be as honest and direct as you can be, and sometimes that might mean giving the difficult feedback or having a difficult conversation. But actually, most of the most impactful conversations that have been had with me are the things that were probably a little bit insulting at the time, but they're things that you need to hear because the person is coming at it with kindness because they want you to be better. So trying to then take that forward and emulate that and, give other people the same respect and the same genuine help to help them get better. It's really difficult to navigate, but I think once you get comfortable with it, once you have those first one or two conversations and kind of accept for yourself that, yeah, actually this is helping, that person did receive it well, I can see they're taking it on board and, it's helping them to get to the next level, then it becomes a bit more rewarding. The other thing kind of linked to trust too, and it feeds into what we were just talking about, getting down into the weeds and doing the work with your team. I think women in particular have a tough balance in that respect because I think we tend to be, and I hate using a generalization, but I think we tend to be a bit more hesitant to make that call as to when we need to get out of the weeds and maybe go back into our businesses and say, do you know what? I need to hire person X to do that, or I need some support to do this. We're a lot more prone to continue doing it ourselves and rolling up the sleeves and kind of getting to that point of burnout. Where do I need to actually show that I'm growing our team's capability to do more rather than just taking it all on board myself?
Well, and that balance is such, I mean, this kind of came up when we were chatting the other day, but I mean, that balance between the responsibilities, that balance of knowing, how much to be rolling up your sleeves to show that you're part of the team versus, what you need to do to be leading and making the right calls. I mean, that's a constant balancing act throughout, looks differently at different stages of your career, but in a leadership role, that is a a big component of what you do.
But also being able to make those tough decisions, those tough calls, and showing your team that you can make those tough decisions and gaining the respect for that as well, I think is super important. As Lisa said, it's not easy as a woman. Once you start, it gets easier to make the tough calls. But yeah, it's something that we hold back in doing, and we can't because we have to lead in the same way that everybody else does. So your team need to trust that you've got their back and you can make those decisions. You can listen to them, you can hear them.
Yeah. I mean, Caroline, from your perspective, is there anything that you've seen that is a good practical practice to help build trust?
I think clear, concise communication works. And to be your authentic self. It's something that CBRE as a business through DE and I will always say, bring your authentic self.
Yeah.
So that can be the good, the bad, and the ugly that equally I might see of the team, but equally they may see of me as well. And they have to be able, the team have to be able to trust me that as a leader that I've got their back. It has to be two-way traffic. And if we don't recognize that as equally as we have to trust our teams, they've got to trust us.
Yeah.
We're failing as leaders because of the environment that we work in. We don't get a second chance if we've got an issue because, you know, you could have a neighbour you like mine that's going out to car Netflix. What's going on? It's too critical an environment not to utilise the time when we have it to drive the culture, to endorse the behaviours that you want, that you expect, that you want to see. And it's the camaraderie that you see maybe when times are bad.
And that's, you know, it's a really good point because during COVID, you know, that making that pivot to an at-home work environment from in office, I saw teams do it brilliantly. And I saw teams that really struggled with it. And when tough things happen, and especially things that are totally out of your control, that is a true test of what you have built around you when your team can kind of all rally together.
There's another thing I think with trust is the accountability and the empowerment. So driving accountability through your team, but also being able to empower them. And interestingly, I had a situation come up yesterday, really, when I realized I'm stepping into a situation whereby I'm not empowering my team and allowing them to lead that situation and stepping in if I'm needed. So I had to check myself and pull myself back out and say, we've hired professionals, experienced people that are able to do these things without you being in the room.
Well, and also kind of to that point, I mean, you know, how they go about that, doing that task or solving that problem, it may be different than how you would personally do it. But in that trust in knowing that you hired a smart, qualified person for that role, you give them that freedom and that flexibility to do it their way.
Absolutely. I want my team to challenge me as much as I can challenge them. I want them to tell me they know better than me. But, you know, there's nothing better, right? So, you know, I need that back my way as well, because that challenges me to be a better leader. So
is there any moment that you can recall that kind of changed your approach in leadership or started to make you think about it in a different way?
As I was saying earlier, so I didn't feel like I could be my authentic self or feel confident in myself probably until about 10 years ago in my career. But that doesn't mean I didn't have a level of confidence or, you know, it doesn't mean I cowered away or was shy or didn't speak up at all. But I would say in my early 20s in my career, I was always trying to be heard because I felt like that displayed confidence, and I didn't necessarily always speak at the right times, and I certainly didn't listen at all the right times. So there was a particular moment where I'm in a supply meeting and it was a really big deal. I can't remember the figures that were on the table, but they were more than I'd ever seen in my early 20s. And I'm sat with my director to the left of me. I'm being confident, Eve, and I'm talking a lot, as I do. People that know me know that I do talk a lot. And he said, "Can we just hold this meeting right now? I just need to step out of the room. Eve, come on, let's step out of the room." And we walked out of the room and thought, "Oh God, what's going on here? Why are we stepping out? We're trying to put them under pressure in the negotiation. Is it a tactic?" And actually it was my director trying to tell me to shut up and listen. And he said, you never know what you will hear because you're not allowing them to just flow in their discussions. So you're cutting them off because you want to be heard. And you know, he's like, some of the things you're saying are absolutely great and fine, but you've got to pause and just allow them to talk, and you never know what you might find out.
Well, and that ties back to what you said, Lisa, too, about, you know, that was an uncomfortable moment to, you know,
Absolutely.
I mean, but the kindness that he was actually showing you, that the care for your career and how you develop was that, that superseded a few moments of discomfort.
It gave me trust in him, though, over time. So I actually don't mind receiving criticism so long as I can do something with it. So I've always appreciated it. I think my dad's always been quite outspoken, so I've always got that at home.
Actually, that's a great segue then into, like, for Caroline and Lisa, what are other skills that you've been surprised by for yourselves?
The power of emotional intelligence and empathy.
Yeah.
And a bit like Eve, the value of listening. And don't ever underestimate the audience is, one thing really, really important, that you don't know really the true skill set of people at times. I think that's really important, that you listen to how they're feeling, because their perception of me on a day might be totally different to what I want to demonstrate on that day.
Yeah.
And, we're all only really as good as the last lunch. So it's to listen, to be empathetic, to stand in their shoes. Like, I don't know what it's like to get that call at 3:00 in the morning. You have to get out of bed. There's alarms going. It's critical.
Right.
I might get the call an hour later to tell me it's happened, but they've got to come out of the sleep mode, leave a home, get into a car and get there and resolve it. So it's to understand the challenge that can bring, and just be your true self.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think it's a lesson I learned later in my life about that comfort with my own authenticity, but it absolutely served me well at this point. So, Lisa, what about you? What's a skill that you've learned about being a leader that kind of surprised you?
One of the biggest lessons I learned was that a lot of the feedback and the messaging and the advice that you get in the earlier parts of your career, usually it's around being more direct, being more assertive, being clearer, putting your hand up and doing more. But when you get to that kind of senior leadership level, there's almost a need to actually stop all of that. Now you get to be yourself, because you've already proved that you can do all of that stuff. Now you just get to be yourself. And if you come into an environment as a senior woman and you have a very assertive or, a very, direct style, suddenly it's more likely to have a negative impact than the exact same conversation or the exact same words coming out of the mouth of a man.
Yeah.
And my real belief around this is that it's not really anything to do with us as women, but it is about society, and it's about general misogyny, right, that exists in the world, because not that long ago, women were not allowed to have credit cards. Us suddenly being here and having roles and having senior leadership positions, like men is different to how it was before. And there is still a little bit of that underlying misogyny that, we're all very grateful. Most of the men that we work with are not like that, but I think you'd be ignoring the elephant in the room if I didn't acknowledge that it does still exist. And most women here will have to deal with at some point somebody who is not as well informed, who is not as forward thinking. So I think it's only fair to acknowledge that is something you have to navigate.
Absolutely, because there's a matter of conscious and unconscious bias, and someone might not even really be aware that how they're answering you back, or how they maybe dismissed you in a meeting, or didn't listen to your idea but listened to your male colleague's idea that was the same, that very similar concept, like those kinds of things. Sometimes there's people are very aware of it, and then there's other times that they're not even aware of it. I mean, it's a really important point to, those are the realities of navigating a career as a woman. But it's actually interesting, because one of the things we had talked about too was about that idea of not necessarily trying to emulate a leader ahead of you. And that actually brings up, a really, you segue kind of nicely into that, Lisa, because it was, seeing male leaders before you or seeing other female leaders before you. How do you pick and choose, which are what are the characteristics that work for you? So, Eve, is there anything that you kind of have experienced in that regard?
I did try and emulate how others behaved, and I experienced a lot of bad behavior, and I'd probably try and emulate that, thinking that's how I'm supposed to lead, and that's when I'm younger. But I don't necessarily lead the way anybody else leads. Yeah. I just lead the way Eve leads, and I try to be Eve inside of work as Eve outside of work. And I think most people that know me know that I'm no different. They'll see me around and I'm still Eve, and they'll see me in an office or a meeting. Yes, in a meeting I might be slightly different because I've got to get things done in that
Yeah.
meeting, but then I'm still Eve and I'm approachable and transparent. It's just how it should be. So for me, it's just, continue to show up as your authentic self, and then it allows others to be. And, looking at others and how they're doing things doesn't mean that's how you should do things. So if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. I do see it still regularly where a female goes to talk and a male will talk over a female, and it's completely unconscious. So it's not to sort of put that person down, but I do urge anybody else that's in that meeting and they see that happen, kind of just say, oh, hey, you look like you wanted to say something.
Right.
And try and create that space so they can have their say as well, because it's not necessarily a conscious thing that person's done. So it's everybody's responsibility to try and create that space, that safe space, to allow everybody to have a voice, and they could be male or female, right? So, it happens both ways, probably more often to females, but it does happen both ways. I've seen it. Could be junior staff versus senior staff. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, there's a leader that I've worked with for many years. And one thing I always appreciated in a conversation where, especially if it was a strategy conversation or something was being kind of presented in, is he always withheld his own judgment. He wanted to hear what everybody else had to say first. It instantly gave you a sense of, okay, well, my opinion actually does matter in this. So what are some of the things that you've seen that have helped your teams so that they don't get burnt out?
I think it's a really difficult one to answer because it's so personal to each individual. Right? I was just in a meeting with another industry colleague yesterday who was reminding everybody that, 20 minutes of meditation, prevention is better than cure, that there are practices like that we can all work into our everyday to just give us that headspace. Another kind of boost of inspiration I got just before Christmas that gave me a massive kick up the backside was we had our CEO over in Dublin visiting Turner and Townsend, and we did a bit of a fireside chat, and somebody asked him that exact question about managing the stressors of the job. And one of the responses he shared was that, when he is finished and he's switching off with his family at the weekend or in the evening, he is completely switched off, and he does allow his mind to reset. And I think we all probably try to convince ourselves that people in those senior roles must be thinking about work 24/7, but actually to be able to do the job, they have to switch off. So it kind of gave me almost permission, or it gave me a bit of boost of confidence to really try over Christmas to properly switch off myself, which I did. I think having that example set to you and continuing to communicate that to your teams, or if you see somebody who you think is overdoing it, actually sometimes being the one to tell them,
It's
switch
okay.
off now.
Yeah.
It's okay. That's really important. Like in my first probably year at Turner and Townsend, I had a new director that I was working for that had just moved back to the office, and I distinctly remember we had a massive new client, big hyperscale data center, really exciting, and I was doing a cost plan as the QS. And I got something wrong and I remeasured, and over again I was going back to this director with this exercise that I had finished, and it wasn't right. But he wasn't telling me how to fix it. He was just giving me feedback and letting me go at it again. And I remember kind of racing back to his desk probably at like 5:30, being like, let's go through it now. I think I've cracked it. And he was kind of like, no, he was like, I'm getting the train. It's the kid's bedtime. But it's such an example for me early on that, no matter how important you think this client is, they're not waiting to see this cost plan at 6:00, right? And if you've got young children, or if you've got an elderly parent that you need to care for, like you need to keep that balance. But, he probably doesn't even remember that conversation. But
Right.
it sets such a powerful message to me at the time that, as a woman who plans to get married, plans to have a family, that's never going to be disrespected or not valued in this organization, because the leaders that we have are already setting that tone, that it's important and you need your balance.
So Caroline, what about for you? What are some of the things that you have done to help your teams manage just the stress and the pace?
I suppose it's to be available, and to be willing to listen. It might sound very cliched, but I think if they get the opportunity to share their pain with you, it's like, right, okay, it's okay. We have a plan. We obviously within CBRE do an awful lot around well-being and, your need to switch off, turn your phone off, take the time with your family. I have to be very honest, and I know there's probably one in the audience here that's just going to laugh. I'm very good at giving that advice. I'm not very good at taking that advice.
Yeah.
But I am trying. I think we can only be the best of ourselves if you do take that opportunity to walk away and switch off. It can be very hard because it is chaotic, all the things we have said about the data center industry, but it's also addictive.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, what's next? What's next? And I remember one of the lads said to me a few days later, well, boss, what's next? And I'm standing there going, can I just process this?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was like, no, we have to keep going. We have to keep going. What's next? And I would be very fortunate to work with a very competitive team
Yeah.
that always strive for excellence. But it's my job to try and get them to switch off, and they are getting a lot better at it.
So it's interesting because, we're as we're having this conversation today, we're, right on the back end of the Christmas holidays, and it is, I don't remember this earlier in my career, but today everybody really does take the time off.
Yeah.
Offices close, companies, have a shutdown during that time period. And it's one of those rare moments where everybody's offline at the same time. So it gives you that permission, whether you need it or not, to just not think about it and to concentrate on your family, concentrate on, sitting and reading books that you haven't had a chance to read for the previous, 6 months or whatever. It's a very timely reminder. And I'm always so very surprised by the time coming back to work in January, how much better I feel. I do, just to really genuinely just shut my brain off for a couple of weeks and just go enjoy the other things in life and what that does for me coming back in, into the new year. So we've talked a lot about, for women in leadership and the challenges that we've all faced as women building our careers in general. I don't even think it's necessarily relevant specifically to this industry, but what would you like to see improve for the next generation?
I'm very passionate about mental wellness. We work in an industry whereby we lose people. We lose people because they can't handle the pressure that's put on them on a day-to-day, and it doesn't get spoken about enough, to be honest. There's a really high suicide rate in our industry and construction as a whole. Everybody in this room and beyond, it's all of our responsibility to allow people that space to watch our teams, to make sure we can see when they're pushing themselves too hard and we're encouraging them to take a step back. Or, you were with a mutual friend yesterday who meditates. I meditate now every day because of this person, and it's changed the way I can handle my days. I wouldn't say I do it every single day, but I'd say probably 5 out of 7 now. And it's been really huge support for me that I can do for myself, and it doesn't take a lot of time out of my day. We drive empowerment and accountability, which is great, right? We all want to feel empowered and accountable, but it's a fine line, because when someone's so accountable that they can't step back in a difficult situation, we've got to be able to spot that and check them and help them take that step back. And how do we do that? By giving them more support in a different way, and we have to figure that out, and that's not always an easy thing to do.
And that is important to the younger generations coming in. They do place a much higher value on work-life balance. And when I listen to people in my peer group, of your age peer group, kind of complaining about those kids these days, that kind of thing. And it always feels like, oh, you've really become old, haven't you? But it is, that is what they're bringing to the table. And I think it's a good thing. So Lisa, what about for you? What would you like to see for the next generation?
I think probably greater levels of conversations around, workplace dynamics, societal dynamics, and how that affects both men and women in the workplace, in construction and beyond. Because again, I think it's one of those things that we don't really speak about that openly. But the reality is, I don't know if there's any couples in the room, but if we had a couple working in a data center company, a couple working together in Yondr or Turner and Townsend, for example, and if that couple have an elderly dependent or a child, it very quickly becomes impossible for the two of them to do their job without a great level of stress. So I think there's a massive inequality there, and it obviously tends to affect women disproportionately, because a lot of the time, because of pay gaps, the woman in that scenario might be the lower earner, makes financial sense. They're the ones that have to step back, impacts their career, and kind of it keeps that cycle going and keeps making it more difficult to kind of achieve that better gender balance in workplaces and more equity. So I think the more we have conversations about that, the more we support kind of equal leave, parental leave for both parents, to try and balance that load, right? It doesn't help if you need to get somebody to a data center at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they've got to feed a baby or whatever it is. But
That's where I come in.
exactly, yeah. Caroline has to get on her bike then. But I think that is a really important thing, because otherwise we're going to leave 40% of the workforce completely untapped while we're screaming out about a skills crisis and a resource crisis in the industry. So we have to find a way to be able to tap into everybody that's out there in the market.
And I think what's interesting, because I completely agree with you on that communication side of it, just initiating those conversations. And it doesn't matter what setting it is, because we were having, on a previous episode of the podcast, we were having a conversation, and there was talk about the idea of, the person who was speaking had thrown out this idea about putting a creche on site at a data center and the resistance that she had received to that. Well, the person that I had someone actually come up to me at a trade show and then say, "Hey, I was listening to your podcast. I heard that episode, and that idea just completely blew my mind." And it just got the wheels turning for her. That was just a singular conversation, So I think the more willing you are to have a conversation in many different contexts, it's going to start the wheels turning for a lot of different people. And I think that's ultimately what picks up steam and builds momentum and starts to drive real change.
I've been very fortunate in CBRE that I've been supported and guided by really strong managers who believed in me and have brought me on a journey to where I am now. I never thought I would be, to be very honest, and they believed in me. And there's a lot of ladies in this room that I have the pleasure of working with on a daily basis, and take that guidance. Don't be afraid. There's great allies in this room and in our wider business. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Believe in yourself. And you know what? I've probably got a few imposters on my shoulders, and that's rich coming from me. But there are people out there that will help. And if I can, by any means, do anything, I'm like Eve, involved in mentor programs and everything else. And we're all human at the end of the day. And I think we need to realise that. And none of us are perfect, but there are a lot of great advocates in the CBRE driving diversity, inclusion and equity, and take the opportunities that are there. Don't be afraid to put your hand up, ask for help, take the guidance and take the training. You don't know where it'll bring you.
Well, that's kind of the perfect place to end this today. You've given some great advice. And, I think I'd like to just thank all three of you for joining us on stage. Been a really great conversation, and I have really enjoyed kind of getting all your perspectives. And I hope everybody in the audience has as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Critical Careers. A special thank you to our sponsor, CBRE, for their support in helping us share the stories of the people shaping the future of digital infrastructure. To learn more about CBRE, visit www.cbre.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, share, and follow the podcast. Thanks for listening.